Thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. We welcome back Alicia Planincic to talk about real estate and its worrying and growing share of our economy. She is the Director of Policy and Economics at the Business Council of Alberta. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you recently wrote about real estate and its share of the Canadian economy. What was the gist of your article?
Yeah, so we basically found that when we look at, the economy and economic value in Canada, real estate is really what powers the Canadian economy. And what was interesting to me, you can assume that in those bigger markets, BC and Ontario, that might not be surprising. But what's most interesting to me is that's actually true in 6 out of 10 provinces. Real estate is the biggest industry. And in those other 4, mostly, the resource provinces, it's actually a very close number 2. So this is not just a particular provinces thing. This is really Canada-wide. Real estate really powers our economy.
And so Alberta, it's in second place after resource development, certainly. So why is that a bad thing? Let me ask it that way.
Yeah, so to an extent, real estate is important. These are the dollars that are spent on rent. It's the work of property managers and realtors. So it's an important part of our economy for sure. But I think where it becomes a concern is when we see such growth over not just the last decade, but the last couple of decades. And again, this is something that it's not just true in particular provinces. It's really a story Canada-wide where what's driven our economic growth is not, export industries, the kind of high value sectors that you might think of. It's really real estate. And I think the challenge with that is that's not really what's going to drive long-term prosperity. Certainly it's meeting the needs right now for the population, but that's not really what's going to drive higher wages, higher income for the next decade.
So I'm presuming there's an age differential on impact as well. So if you're over 60 and you've got real estate, it's probably a happy thing. But if you're, 18 to 34, again, it's part of the challenge for the younger age cohort to actually get integrated into our economy. Is that right?
For sure. There's also certainly a housing affordability story here. And I think what's important to note is when we look at real estate, the industry as economists define it, that is separate from residential construction. So when we see more money pouring into real estate, that doesn't mean that we're actually building more housing. And so I think that's another part of the concern is, if we saw that it was building more housing, that's a little bit of a different matter. But it's not that we're building more housing. It's just that more money is going into rent, to property managers, and so forth. And that doesn't really create a lot of value, right? We create value when we actually build things as an economy.
Right. How does Canada compare to other advanced economies? Is this a problem that is worldwide, or is it particular to Canada?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I want to put this in context where, the percentage of our economy dedicated to real estate, it's not that out of the ordinary when we look at other rich countries. I think where I become concerned is just the growth that we've seen over recent decades and how it's almost as if it's crowded out those other sectors. So we look at, the sectors that do create very high paying, high productive jobs. Those are the ones that have kind of been crowded out by the sector. And so I think that's where the concern is, not that we're not to the point where there's, probably a housing market collapse kind of thing, but it's more just the shift that we've seen in recent decades. That's really where the concern lies. Now, I will say the good news is that's probably likely to stop, right? I think we might actually be reaching a peak for a couple of reasons.
Go on, tell us.
Yeah, I think so. One is population growth is really slowing. So I don't know if you saw the latest population stats from Stats Canada. They're pretty incredible, just a teeny tiny fraction of what we were seeing. And a large part of that is just a huge shift in immigration strategy, right? The amount of immigration has just drastically decreased. And I think this is something that we can expect going forward to be, a much more slower level. So we're going to see a natural decline from that. But then the other piece is actually a policy change. And that's kind of at least what we're seeing and hearing from the Carney government, where there's going to be a greater emphasis on building things. We see that in some of the new legislation, focus on infrastructure and trade corridors and pipelines and this sort of thing. That could be a very big shift for our economy.